All right, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium. It's actually Saturday, October 18th, 2014, and the reason I'm doing it 2 days late, I normally do this on Thursday, as all of you know, but this last week has just been very hectic. I got involved in some things on Thursday, and I just couldn't get free, and then on Friday I had prior commitments. So 2 days late, a day late, but not necessarily a dollar short. Um, I'm going to be talking today about the Ebola crisis. And I've had a lot of you emailing me. I've had last night when we did our members vid chat on the website, I had a bunch of people asking me about what did I think about the Ebola crisis. And I have been kind of laying back, uh, not commenting about it because there's so much information out there now, pro and con, back and forth. The data set appears to be in the process of being obfuscated. All right. But if you've been following it, if you're like me, my intuition all along has been that we're looking at more global only. We're looking at more theater. And I'm not saying that to diminish the suffering or loss of any families that have lost family members from this disease. But given the amount of hype and so on that we've seen, I think it's important to alert you to this story that I found on Global Research News. And I want to read 3 paragraphs from it. And then I want to read a few things from a recent blog by John Rappaport. If you don't know that name, he's an American alternative researcher, reporter that has followed through the years a number of medical stories and documenting how most of them turn out to be hype and created crises. But the first article I want to read to you is from Global Research, the Global Research website. If you don't know it, this is an important article. I'll link it. The title is U.S. is responsible for Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And I want you to listen to the opening 3 paragraphs of this article because this says it all. Dr. Cyril Broderick, a Liberian scientist and former professor of plant pathology at the University of Liberia's College of Agriculture and Forestry, says that the West, particularly the U.S., is responsible for the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Dr. Broderick claims the following in an exclusive article published in the Daily Observer, based in Monrovia, Liberia. He wrote the following, quote, "The U.S. Department of Defense is funding Ebola trials on humans, trials which started just weeks before the Ebola outbreak in Guinea and Sierra Leone. The reports continue and state that the DoD gave a contract worth $140 million to Tecmira, a Canadian pharmaceutical company, to conduct Ebola research. This research work involved injecting and infusing healthy humans with the deadly Ebola virus. Hence, the DoD is listed as a collaborator in a first human Ebola clinical trial, numbered NCT 02041715, which started in January of 2014, shortly before an Ebola epidemic was declared in West Africa in March." Unquote. And I'm continuing now with the Global Research article. It is possible that the United States Department of Defense, or pardon me, is it possible that the United States Department of Defense and other Western countries, note that phrase please, that's crucial, and other Western countries are directly responsible for infecting Africans with the Ebola virus. Dr. Broderick claims that the U.S. government has a research laboratory located in a town called Kenema in Sierra Leone, which studies what he calls, quote, viral fever bioterrorism, unquote. It is also the town where he acknowledges that it is the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Is it a fact? Is Dr. Broderick a conspiracy theorist? He says that there is urgent need for affirmative action in protecting the less affluent of poorer countries, especially African citizens whose countries are not as scientifically and industrial endowed as the United States and most Western countries, sources of most viral or bacterial GMOs that are strategically designed as biological weapons. He also asks an important question when he says it is most disturbing that the U.S. government has been operating a viral hemorrhagic fever bioterrorism research laboratory in Sierra Leone. Are there others? Unquote. And I'll link that for you on the website. Now remember that I asked you to remember other countries, all right? We'll get to that in a minute. Now, John Rappaport, in a blog on his website, and I'll link this one as well, has this take on what may be going on behind this Ebola scare. And quite frankly, I think something like this is in the sick, twisted minds of the global elite running the West, all right? The sick, psychopathic minds. Quote, use a crisis to build a larger structure than previously existed, as in one global healthcare system, all encompassing. The propaganda, we can't defeat Ebola unless all nations form one system that allows prevention and quarantine and immediate treatment anywhere on Earth. In that sense, Ebola is the occasion for adding wings to the system. In other words, this is being deliberately designed to go global and to force nations that may not want to integrate with the West. Think of the BRICS bloc here, folks, into a global healthcare system and ergo, de facto, some sort of global government. Now, that's grant you, and I know John Rappaport, he would probably say this as well. This is all high octane speculation. But listen carefully to what he goes on to say. Ditto for every so-called epidemic. Well, we faced down and ultimately defeated Virus X, but at great cost of life. Now we need to build better bridges between the healthcare systems of nations. And finally, we need one great dispensary that adjudicates where the drugs and vaccines go, who is quarantined, which borders are sealed off at any point on the globe. Unquote. That's him kind of sarcastically giving you what kind of spin they're going to offer. We're talking about a very high level op here. The globalist dream, a single cradle to grave maze. Every person on earth follows as a docile patient taking orders, submitting to diagnoses, taking vaccines and drugs, allowing their bodies and minds and energies and strength and independence to be drained away. A single global medical system is the ideal structure of control. Crisis A, build a bigger system. Crisis B, add to that system. Crisis C, add more to the system. And of course, invent each crisis. Unquote. And that's exactly what I think is going on too here, folks. Now, why do I say that? Because I asked you to remember other countries. And I just did a blog or have a blog coming up, I forget which, on the website about this issue. So pay attention to the website. There are other countries involved. Let's remember where Ebola first broke out. It first broke out in 1976 in Zaire, or the Congo, all right? Now, for those of you who've read my book, The Nazi International, you'll recall that I mentioned a West German think tank that was established in the very, very late 1970s, early 1980s, all right? The think tank was on a private preserve of some 200,000 acres that the president of the Congo, of Zaire, had given to this West German country, a company called OTRAG, Orbital Raketentransport und Transportallgemeinschaft, all right? And this company was to be developing cheap satellite transport. But Mikhail Gorbachev at the time accused OTRAG and this private corporate preserve of actually being kind of the German Area 51 located in Africa. And specifically, he accused the German government of running biotechnology, bioweapons chemical warfare research laboratories in this private preserve. Now, I have no idea if this private preserve is close to the area in the Congo where Ebola would later break out, but I do find it suspicious, highly suspicious, that this is where Ebola started, in the same country that we had a weapons laboratory. And now the Global Research article is not the only article that we see coming out of Africa. There have been other articles from Africans in Ghana and so on stating that this is all hype in the Western media, that the West is behind it, that the virus is being spread by vaccines. So look what we have. You know that this is a theater of some sort. Because on the one hand, the mainstream media in the West are not reporting these stories out of Africa, where African scientists are telling us that there is some correlation that they have observed between vaccine trials and Ebola outbreaks. In the West, in the United States in particular, we're now hearing stories on the mainstream media that even the biological containment suits are not enough to stop transmission of the disease. So, in other words, the data set, this is a clear signature in my mind of an orchestrated theater. The data set is being orchestrated between two extremes, all right? And that to me indicates that they intend to drive as much confusion and fear about the whole thing as they possibly can. So keep your eyes peeled on this one, folks. I'm going to suggest that we watch the news services of the BRICS bloc and how they begin to report this Ebola stuff, particularly in Africa, where we're now sending troops. That's the other part of the geopolitical game. Because remember, China has made a big, huge push to gain Africa as a trading partner and to build up infrastructure of roads, hospitals, and schools in Africa so that they can begin to use Africa as a trading partner. All right. The West is sending in troops in response to the Ebola scare. But I really suspect that, again, this was theater in part to be able to inject troops into Africa to slow down, forestall, and ultimately kick the Chinese penetration of Africa out. So, every which way we slice it, there's theater. Please watch the BRICS nations and how they start reporting and handling the Ebola, quote, crisis, unquote. All right. That's it for my news and views this week, everybody. God bless, and I'll see you on the flip side.